Hello, it's Midweek Extra, first one of the season. How exciting. I am John Gibbons, your host, and I'm joined by Neil Atkinson, by Mo Stewart, and by Rob Gutmann. And this season's Midweek Extra is sponsored by our old friends at Green King Sport. They were doing Monday shows last week, but I think between us, we've realised that on Monday, no one wants to think about going to the pub. Whereas by Thursday, it's a Wednesday today, but by Thursday, you're ready to go again, Neil.
And
you're planning nights out.
And you've just had a fantastic Champions League experience, which is part of the point this season. You know, so many Champions League games, so many Midweek Extras. And then you can imagine, well, the Reds are on the march, so I'll be on the march into the weekend with Green King.
And there you are. So if you download the app, and you can find your nearest Green King pub and get special offers when live sport is on the TV, which brilliantly is all the fucking time. So there we are. It's happy hours plural. They'll have all the big international games over the next week. So remember, football in particular is meant to be enjoyed together. So maybe enjoy it together at a Green King pub. I just want to say personally, huge thanks to Green King Sport for partnering with us again this season. We do really appreciate it, and do give Green King Sport a follow on Instagram as well, where you'll be hearing from us throughout the season, including me before United being a coward and only predicting a 2-1 win. So if you want to look at that and go, so get on this prick, we're going to fucking batter them because we did. How wrong was I? So there we are. So nice one to them. But this show is going to focus on the window generally, but we're going to start with something David Ornstein said on an Athletic podcast, which has caused a bit of commotion. It got clipped on Twitter. Happens to the best of us, David. Take it out of context. And basically, what he said, Neil, and I'll sort of get the tweets up here now, is I speak to other people in similar worlds, and so far they are taking their hats off to Richard Hughes. So there you are. Ornstein is chatting to other sporting directors and us, and they're going, that Rich Hughes looks the business. Liverpool fans disagree. Who's right?
So I think that how sporting directors view their jobs and how what supporters want, there will sometimes be some disagreements. I think also at times it may well be the case that what managers want and what sporting directors want, there might be some disagreements. I think the idea of being aligned across the board on things matters. But if we just take it at face value, I think the bit that we do miss, put the transfer stuff and the contracts aside, he's effectively had to bring in a new manager and rebuild an entire backroom team. Mm. And I think that's probably the bit that they're taking the hats off to if they're rated within football. Now, simultaneously, there might be some sporting directors David Ornstein speaking to who think, he's doing all right, but it's nothing special. There might be some who think he's crap. There might also be some who think that he's doing it well, but that doesn't necessarily mean success. And I think it's worth sort of pointing that out. Sporting directors can think X is doing a really good job, but that doesn't mean that the team that the sporting director of will immediately be successful or anything like that. But I do think that the missed bit is just his job is not just the bits that we obsess over. His job is also ensuring that Liverpool have got the right level of between continuity, newness, and the right type of newness that allows continuity. And he's gone out there and hired those people and brought them in. And they're the people that we don't hear about, or if we do hear about, it's one press release and we never think about them ever again. Or maybe because they played for Everton, we laugh about it a bit. Mm-hmm. Apart from that, so that could be the bits and pieces. But I think also the idea of sort of standing quite strong and saying, well, we're only going to get the right person might be the sort of thing some sporting directors like they like to hear of. Because they'd like to be able to do that, but they've got a manager or someone above them who doesn't let them, who says, well, you've got to go and find someone. And then they have to go and find someone, and they're thinking to themselves, I don't know if I've got the right someone. But from time to time, there might be nothing wrong with that. Like, that might actually get results. If the manager needs a player and the manager puts some pressure on, the sporting director has to do it, and that sporting director might be thinking, I'd rather not have done that. I feel like I've compromised. Richard Hughes doesn't compromise. He's doing a good job. Whereas there might actually be something in. Well, sometimes you've got to go and do it a bit differently. So I think what my point here is, and I don't think this is the case, but, there's effectively like everyone who made a record post, and Rob can obviously clarify this for us, but everyone who made a record post 1975 would cite how much they loved the Velvet Underground, but no one bought Velvet Underground records. Very true. So they weren't actually successful, the Velvet Underground, but they were the bands that everyone else admired. You don't want to be them.
So Richard Hughes is the Velvet Underground.
So what I'm saying is that he could well, so you could, he could
be Lou Reed though, who did better
and went on to do better. Yeah. But my point about it is that I think that just because sporting directors think something's good doesn't mean it is necessarily inherently good. And if sporting directors thought something was bad, they might, like, what did sporting directors think of Jörg Schmadtke's general sporting director output? But the flip side of that is 3 of the 4 midfielders he bought started at Old Trafford and have started every Liverpool game this season. So, you can't. But the idea is that Schmadtke was just sort of half playing at it a little bit and he just turned up and did a bit of a job and stayed by a pool, is the general perception. But the flip side of that is 3 of his 4 signings started at Old Trafford in a game that Liverpool cruised to a 3-0 victory over. So yeah, I think what I mean, but my next point of this is everyone's just got to not get too carried away on what some other sporting directors think of one sporting director through the medium of David Ornstein. I just much rather go, we get to see the stuff that we get to see on the pitch. We get to sort of go from there. Don't get too wound up about it if you're furious about contract or transfer business on the one hand, but don't get too smug about it on the other, because ultimately he could be John Cale.
I think probably he's probably had 3 comments referring to Richard Hughes in passing, and he's aggregated them fairly enough to say people seem to like him. And it's no more, no less than that.
And said it in a room like this.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you want to actually use it, though, as a route into sort of analysing his work so far, I think Neil's point is you do have to look beyond we haven't got enough signings, in as much as the manager and his backroom team are a clutch of signings, you say. We are, I think, a Zubamendi not choosing to prefer the mountains of San Sebastian and the lovely food there away from having people going, that was a good window, we got 2 world-ish class players in Zubamendi and Chiesa. Big problems fixed. Would have liked a defender, but we haven't lost anyone.
Keeper.
Yeah, exactly. Got a really good keeper succession plan. And also, you take on board that there's probably some interesting conversation. Oh, sorry, I'm forgetting the major thing. He's sold really well. Well, the club has sold really well. If he takes,
that'll impress the other fellas. That's
going to impress us.
So. The other fellas are made up. Can't believe it. The way he played that Sepp van der Beek situation, unreal. But all joking aside, he's created a nice bedrock for us to do what the fuck we like PSR-wise, right? While all those other bums are flailing around having to sell star players potentially. So, if you go to the tick sheet, the coaching staff, the who you sell, the who you buy, the vibes, he's probably taking a good 3.5 out of 4 of those, and 1 he's a little bit unlucky with. So, although I think David's evidence is pretty anecdotal, and that's all he meant it to be, let's put it this way: as a supporter, from all I know about Richard Hughes thus far, I'm happy.
There's the idea of how much do we understand about what these people's jobs are, Mo, and also do we need to? So how much do we want to judge Richard Hughes? But I feel like if you are choosing to judge him, then you do need to try and figure out, well, what is he actually? What do his bosses think his job description is? Do you know what I mean? Before we then say, well, is it fair enough that that the people who David Ornstein is speaking to think he's doing a good job?
Yeah, and I think the timeline matters as well, because the stuff that we're going to come on to around the contracts for the guys that we do have in the building, which I think is probably going to be the most contentious part of it, the timeline that we're working on is that we'd quite like that to happen during the window, but the reality is that doesn't need to happen during the window. There might well have been a reason why they wanted to wait until after the window. They wanted to wait until these players have had some time to see the new hires, Arne Slot and his coaching team, and maybe whether that will influence how they go about these new contracts. So that matters as well. But I'm also, I also think that we need to consider Ornstein himself and the reasons as to why he's saying this now. Because if you listen to the show, and I didn't listen to the entire bit, but if you listen to the quote, him saying the quotes, there's almost like a little element of surprise about the way he's saying this. They should say, well, contrary to what everyone else thinks, people in the industry seem to think this guy's doing okay. So he's aware of the fact that the perception of us as fans is that he hasn't done any of the things that we would hope for him to do. But maybe that's kind of part of why he's pushing back against it, to say, well, look, there are more parameters in it than the ones that we acknowledge and the ones that we work by. So it's interesting. But in the same piece, he does also say that those contracts are going to be the clincher as to whether he's doing a good job or not, because he's doing a good job up to this point, replacing Jurgen Klopp. I think, as a side note, that also says to me how many people within football thought that our house was going to fall down once Jurgen was out of the building. Yeah. And whether or not we've got a great squad or whatever, whether that's due to historical instances of a manager being that good and then having someone to follow them, or whether it's just simply a fact of how many parts of the club Jurgen was involved in by the time he finished and how much they had to unravel and plug into a new person. So I think that comes into it as well. But we're all smart enough to know that this is still very early stages, and however we feel about what Richard Hughes is doing now, 6 months later, we'll be able to make much more definitive arguments as to what he's done and what he is doing.
I think the Jurgen thing's just it's a really insightful point from Mo. I think in general, because Jurgen was in lots of ways a really, really special person, I think the idea that therefore he was remarkably special at all facets of his own job, which he obviously, in lots of senses, was. Like he was literally one of the best elite coaches of footballers in the world, and had presided over what was an excellent period of success for Liverpool, and had also been a big part of that, much wider than just the coaching brief. So, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think that also didn't allow, and still doesn't allow, for a lot of almost disrespect aspects of it. Like, for instance, one of the things he's left behind is an excellent squad full of really coachable players who expect to be coached and know what it is to be coached. Want that in their day, if you see what I mean. Want that as part of what they're about, And I think that there was, for me, Blundell said something recently, and I think I do think it is insightful, which is that we ended up bottling the feeling that we had when the season began to fall apart last season. Well, some of us did, and that was taken into the summer, and I think that was taken by Liverpool supporters and also by people outside the Liverpool supporting community, and that was the takeaway. But there was the feeling that we had the day we walked out against Chelsea at Anfield, that day when the squad was fitter, when we were in good nick, we knew Jurgen was going. One of the things everyone kept saying was, my God, what a legacy he's bequeathing people. If we take the feeling we had the day we go to Brentford and score 4, but 63 players get injured, the way we feel that day is we're in such good. This is a club that's in such good shape, and this, there's so many good players, and then there's all the stuff off the pitch, and then there's the younger players, and then we've got that feeling as well, and that ends up being a bit of a mixed blessing this summer because of the outs and how that makes people sort of feel emotionally and the concerns that they've got, but. The truth, as ever in these things, will be somewhere in the middle of all of this. But it stopped being in the middle of all of this, and it became the way you felt after they drew 2-2 against West Ham off the back of a bad week. That's the one that everyone sort of went, oh God, it's going to be like that, is it, after Jurgen goes? Because it's been a bit like that now with Jurgen, and it'll stay. But no, 2 months previously it was different. 2 months prior to that it was different. And I think that if the truth's in the middle of all of those things, I actually think it's closer to the way we felt against Brentford than the way we felt against Chelsea. But even if the truth's in the middle of all of those things, the body of what the main thing we see this club do, which is what it does on a Saturday with the first team, the body of that's in really good shape. Even if it's in the middle, it's in really good shape, and then someone can come in and they can work it differently, and then they can go where they go, and they might succeed, they might fail. So far, the fella's succeeding, and he feels like a really positive appointment done by the club hierarchy. Hughes, Edwards, anyone else who's involved, Gordon, realistically, maybe Billy Hogan. That feels like it's been a really, really positive move so far. So I think you end up in this slightly sort of tricky position, though, where the other stuff that we're talking about, I want to be really clear about this. I think they should have 2 more players. I think they should have 1 more midfielder. I think they should have 1 more defender. And I think that they might live to regret it. I don't think they necessarily need the midfielder, that the next midfielder to be a pure holding midfielder. I think we're already seeing that may not be right for the direction of travel. But I do think that they could do with 1 more midfielder, 1 more defender in the squad number, in full stop. That's what I really feel they could do with. And I think that we might see that when the challenge gets real in amongst the midweek games, and the manager's already talked about that. But I also think at the minute he has the numbers he wants. We know he doesn't have the quality he wants in midfield because he wanted Zubimendi, but he's got the numbers he wants in midfield. We did the squad, John, and we agreed, actually, we think if he'd have got Zubimendi, he would have let both Endo and Morton go. And so if anything, he's almost got 1 more midfielder potentially around the first team squad than he would have. Again, you can have a conversation about that. And I think if Gomez had gone, they'd have got a different type of defender in, or if Shimikas had gone, they might have got a different type of defender in to cover Robertson or something like that. But I think they need 9. I don't think 8. I think they should have 9. But I think he wants 8. I think he wants 2 for every position, and I think that's what he's got, and I think that's deliberate. I think maybe, as I say, 1 more midfielder, one more midfielder, and then 1 of Endo and Morton to go, 1 more defender. That's what I think we would be in better nick if that was the case. I genuinely do think that. So I'm not going to, sit here and act like, hey, it's all 10 out of 10 and all that sort of stuff. I think that it did need to be a little bit more. But I will make the point I'll make again, which is that all the behind the scenes stuff really does matter. And if anything, it sort of matters more. And I also do have a lot of sympathy for the view of you don't want to sign one that isn't right. Certainly for big money, because of how long it'll take you to get them out of the system and go through that process and the trouble that could cause. So I do understand that. I'm not unsympathetic, but I do think that ultimately, if you want to start grading things out of 10. Before we even talk about the contract, I'm going to take Mo's point. If you want to start grading things out of 10, I'm loath to start giving out 9s and 10s. And maybe whoever it is Ornstein speaking to might do, because they understand wider context more than me. But I'm happy just to understand my bit of context, and that's why I wouldn't be whacking out like 9s and 10s out of 10s.
Do we, when we assess a window, Rob, do we have to sort of include like intangibles, like, just how we're all feeling, how the team seems to be all feeling and things like that? Because, we're all sort of in agreement that we're assessing it in different ways. So as a fan base, you look at transfers, you look at the players in and out, from a point of view of the sporting director, and there's the contract situation as well. And then, the people who David Ornstein speaking to might be sort of looking at other things. But I think, to go back to something that Mo said about the idea that people were thinking Klopp is, Klopp's leaving and everything might sort of fall apart, and it was all built on, his broad shoulders, and as soon as he walked out, it was going to be a bit of a mess. It's early days, and I take Mo's point again about well, let's look at it in 6 months' time. But right now, I think we look in much ruder health, on and off the pitch than maybe people were expecting. Everyone seems to have settled quickly. The manager's got into his groove quickly, and the players are enjoying it, and we're 3 wins from 3, and it feels like they're a team that mean business, and that is being overseen by Richard Hughes effectively.
I mean, to start with, the ultimate cliche is that it's a results business, and that governs everything. And if we continue winning, Richard Hughes can just do shrugging emoji and go, and what's anybody's problem with anything ever? If you keep winning. If we hadn't started like this, and I'm not saying but for the vagaries of luck, because I think there's been zero luck. It's rare you say this. 3 straight wins, and you couldn't say, but there's no sliding doors moments, but really in those games at all, unless you want to really be pedantic about it. There's no sliding doors moments. Thoroughly deserved to win all of them. Probably should have, a bit unlucky not to have had more goals. That's the bottom line here. So, and I think people are viewing that rightly as a really solid body of early work. They're looking at the fixtures ahead. Frightens me, because I do not like the fate temp that's going on at the moment. We've got Bournemouth there. We've got Forest there. We've got Bournemouth, Wolves and Palace. I mean,
you're the worst possible host for that overview show. Despises it. Spoiler alert. Don't somebody has to do like a smoking out. Don't tackle got me doing.
Don't get too heady. But
it's popular that show, Rob.
It's a banger.
Yeah, people love it. Serves well.
Yeah, the feel-good factor is absolutely justified, but you have to go on. It's ridiculously early days, and what happens next is going to govern all of it. I mean, had we not won all of these 3 games, all the conversations about the contracts would have been magnified, and we're going to go on to talk about them. I mean, it is. I think one thing we have to take a step back on when talking about Richard Hughes is forget he doesn't exist in a vacuum that controls everything behind the scenes. He's been appointed by our previous most powerful director of football, Michael Edwards, who's come in with this broader brief. But the broader brief is to sort of oversee a range of FSG-related football projects, of which there still remains just the one, right? So you tell me Michael Edwards is not going to is controlling himself to the extent that he is not sticking his very significant oar in.
Goes in both directions as well. They've appointed people beneath. I think this is really important. Like he ends up being one figure that we talk about, but there's people beneath him as well. So there's the above and there's the underneath, and
the Portuguese fella.
It all feeds in, and I think that's I think it's worth acknowledging. If we're going to talk about these people behind the scenes, then we probably do need to talk about them in the plural and not just in the singular.
Well, we've talked about this. We've spoken about a mutual friend saying, if you wanted, as we all did, Michael Edwards back on board, then, there are certain things that are going to happen. And Richard Hughes is, I'm not saying he's not being given his head, but there's no way that he's not, to a degree, a conduit for Michael Edwards' strategy, will, ideas for how transfer business, how administration of a football club works. Now, we saw in the golden age of Michael Edwards, we loved the big transfers that worked. We didn't love the summers which were, like tumbleweed moment transfer windows, albeit we might have won leagues on the back of them, league singular. But so this is what we're up against, really, and this is what I think judgment of Richard Hughes is up against. And I think possibly the people behind the scenes, to sort of put a cap on this particular topic, John, are realising not that Richard is exactly working with one hand behind his back, but he's got to operate within parameters.
Yeah.
And given those parameters, I think probably those in the know can see that the man is doing the job.
Just a quick on this, though. I think that the other thing you can take from the Ian Graham book and from the wider conversation, I think there's something around the most important thing. I think it comes through in the Ian Graham book, and I think it comes through every little bit of information that you've ever heard, not just to do with Liverpool. It's that everyone's aligned.
Yeah.
And in this moment, everyone should be aligned.
Yeah.
Michael Edwards has come in. He knows Richard Hughes going back years. They've then, off the back of that, appointed the manager. I presume they have honest conversations before they appoint the manager in both directions, because if not, what are we all doing? So we can presume that, and also the manager seems like a very direct, straightforward character. So I think full stop, at the minute, everyone will be aligned, because if they're not, then it would almost be a bit of a failure. And I suspect also that what was already there very much aligns with the Edwards-Hughes slot view of football regardless. So I think there's full alignment, and I think that the main thing that there appears to be genuine agreement on, and again, it's going to wind us up, and it's going to wind me up at times. So I'm not doing a, hey, there's you over there and there's me, but I think that where there's an enormous agreement is that where this squad is at the minute, where Liverpool were last season, what Slot wants from his team, I think where there's an enormous amount of alignment is you're going to have to be one hell of a player to be signed for this football club.
Yeah.
I think that's the bit which I think drives us the most mad. But then I think that is so, with one or two exceptions since 2019, I just think that has been the case, that you're going to have to be an exceptionally special footballer. And there have been examples where that isn't the case. Ozan Kabak, Ben Davies, possibly, and I only say possibly because I think there's a body of evidence he trains well and he's a remarkable professional, possibly Wataru Endo. But apart from that, you can go back, all the way to 2019 and say, if you're going to get signed for this football club, you're going to have to either be right now one hell of a footballer or be on the trajectory to be one hell of a footballer. And I think that that's where there's genuine alignment, but that's going to lead to some transfer windows. If that alignment remains the case, where you're a bit like, I'm not quite sure what we're doing, or why aren't we doing X or Y? And the flip side of that, though, is that hopefully, because there was real alignment in the period prior to the pandemic, no shadow of a doubt, there's going to hopefully be brilliant football teams that are hugely successful as well.
Yeah, it does just all come back to Mo, isn't it? Like what you're judging people on, and you're judging people on what they do or sort of what they don't. And you talk about Richard Hughes' reputation. Generally, Liverpool Football Club's reputation is that it's a really well-run club, and FSG's reputation within the industry are people who are really, really good at running sports teams, and that goes to all of them. Now you smiled then because you're aware that there's other people out there who very much disagree, but we're sitting here as Liverpool supporters and going, well, we could point to 3 or 4 mistakes that FSG have made off the pitch. They can't seem to sell tickets for toffee. Do you know what I mean? There's more issues today. There was stuff around the away tickets yesterday, but fucking Eddie doesn't know that. I'm just picking on someone random. Yeah. Eddie was the sporting director at Arsenal, by the way. Not just a random fella. He's not going well. He's just looking at a point of view of the footballing side that he's sort of seeing on the pitch and beyond, really. And so we are all looking at it a few different ways. And I think people are often surprised and a little sceptical when they hear people say Liverpool Football Club is really well run, but within certain parameters that other people are looking at it, Liverpool Football Club's really well run, and loads of other football clubs will come on to them are fucking not.
Yeah, I think Eddie would be quite surprised if he looked at some of our WhatsApp groups over the course of the last 2 weeks or even the last 48 hours. But
none of the cunts know what an NFC pass is. That's all. That's why I always come back to.
But none of them do, by the way. People who cover the game don't know what an NFC pass is. Sorry.
With the NFC issues at Man U, mine didn't work, by the way. I didn't get in the ground.
Well, that's an issue.
Number one. No, I didn't get in the ground for the Man U game. I watched it in a fucking pub in Manchester. NFC pass. I messaged LFC help. We're digressing here. They got back to me 8 minutes from kickoff whilst I was in said pub, and my lads were in the ground because their two worked. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Yes, I can actually believe it. Unfortunately. But this kind of goes to another thing that I think is a really important part of all of this, and this is kind of the PR battle, because we, the fans, are very much obsessed with the PR battle, with the idea of we want our club to be doing the right things. We want everyone to be seeing and us to be able to agree that they're doing the right things. And the club, the people who are making the decisions, they aren't bothered about being popular. Like, we've seen that from day one. I mean, we saw that in the previous era of Michael Edwards. It's like, if he believes that he's doing the right thing, he doesn't care if everyone else doesn't believe it. Everyone else outside the club, obviously, the people who are in the decision-making team, they all have to agree. Everyone else can kick rocks, basically, as far as they're concerned. And then the proof becomes in the pudding. But it's interesting to me, going back to what I was saying before about why we're hearing this from Ornstein, because is that not a PR-related plan? Is that the suspicion is, certainly amongst a lot of the people who are
where the Boston Red Sox hire over the summer. Yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that he's almost doing the FSG's job for them.
It's like people are acting like he's got a big bag of money in his hand. that Red Sox hand is basically a man with a bribe in his hand with bribe written on it. Like, I reckon if it was, he'd just be a bit more subtle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't get to the top of the game by being that gauche about things. But again, there is the perception within the fan base that FSG are using people like Ornstein, mouthpieces, if you will, to kind of spin their version of the story. But I genuinely don't think that they're that bothered about how we feel about it. There are times when it comes up against, when we're talking about other issues, like ticketing and those kind of things, where it probably does matter. But in terms of the world of the transfers and going back to the contracts, I don't think that they care. And it's interesting because I feel like in this instance, particularly with the contracts, it's put them on the back foot slightly, because the comments from Virgil and from Mo Salah over the last few weeks or so, these are all kind of things to say, well, look, I want to stay. The club haven't kind of said anything to me yet, which is all putting pressure back on the club to say, well, you've not even started? You've not even started? Why haven't you even started? And since then, we've heard a couple of reports saying, well, yes, the club are planning to speak to these people. It's like, well, suddenly it's not on their timeline. Suddenly it's on everybody else, the players' timeline. And suddenly Richard Hughes is in a situation where if he does extend these contracts, it's like, well, clearly they've all said that they want to stay. So he's not really done anything amazing. And if he doesn't, then it's like, well, why have you let these guys go who desperately want to stay? It's an interesting way of going about it. But I do think that the way that they believe is the best way, is the way that they're always going to do things. It doesn't matter, really, what we all think about it. As if they get to where they want to get to, then that's all well and dandy as far as
they do care what we think, but they know that we're most influenced by what we think, by what happens on the pitch. So they know they can either please us in the background, which may lead to disasters on the pitch, in which case we will be more angry than we would have anyway. They're just weighing up where the pleasing is going to happen.
And I think from the perspective of the players, and those two in particular, I think it's interesting, because we mentioned the fact that Richard Hughes likely is aligned with Michael Edwards in terms of how he sees most things within football. This is the same Michael Edwards who was happy to let Gini go, Virgil's big mate, was happy to let Henderson go, who was also very well received in the dressing room until Jurgen got involved, that was. So the likes of Salah and Van Dijk might be thinking, well, I don't want them doing that to me. So they're trying to get ahead of it and trying to get their spin on the situation out into the public sphere, which again, like I say, puts pressure onto Hughes and the decision makers. Whether it'll have any difference, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I think the key interesting thing is that as fans, we're going, well, you've got to sign them all on contracts, yeah? We all want that, yeah? And I'm just not sure that they want, as you're intimating, I'm just not sure they want that. And the problem is they may all end up, they may end up leaving on a free, and we may lose our shit. But they will be, the thing which we can't see is they're going to view it in the terms of opportunity cost. So we don't know they haven't lined up the best next central defender in the world, or the next, or they think they're going to sign, I don't know, Rafa Leao and Anthony Gordon next summer, and they think, love Mo Salah, but we think by the second half of this season his legs will be waning, and we think by the following season definitely more so. It doesn't matter if he started well or what have you. We're making a gamble on these younger players. Now we can all think they're wrong, but let's put it this way. What I wrestle with is they're not fucking stupid. It's not just that they just haven't got round to it. I don't buy any of the explanation. Goes, transfer window keeps you busy, you know, he's got meetings and he's got to have lunch sometimes and there's a holiday time. I don't buy any of that shit. No. The reason if it's true that they haven't begun discussions with these players for transfers, it's because they don't fucking want to, right? And then you've got to ask yourselves why. And you can't start with because they're mad. And I'm not saying right, or
what about minge bags?
Or idiots? No, not well. They're weighing up the cost of renewing the transfer versus the opportunity cost of replacing the player and the wage of that player. I'm not saying they're right, but that's got to be the thought process.
I do also think that there's an element of letting the players see Arne Slot and how he works, because we're all assuming that the point is that the longer it goes on, the more chance there is of them their heads being turned elsewhere. But the more it goes on, the more time they spend with him, they might be like, well, actually, I want to see where this team's going. Like, I like what I'm seeing here. I like what this guy's telling me. And if you're the club, then if these players are more motivated to stay, and this is another card in your hand, essentially, isn't it? So then when you get into these negotiations over money, you can be like, well, do you really want to try and play somewhere else? And do you really think you're going to get as good a chance to win things somewhere else? Do you think you're going to get as good a chance to be in a working functional team as somewhere else? So it's a high-risk strategy, because if the result had gone the other way, then you're definitely making it easier for them to say, well, I don't want to be here. But if the results are going well and everything's going happy, and they can see a team that's going to be not only functioning well but also looking like winning things, then they're going to want to stay more, and then the club are probably going to be able to use that in the leverage.
There's one clear division, though. Sorry, John, I'll shut up. There's one clear division. There's one thing, you can create all kinds of arguments around Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk, but their age is a spectre over all discussions. But Trent Alexander-Arnold is an elite footballer at the perfect age. What the fuck's going on, lads?
They should be talking to him. Like, I don't think there's any of all of the things that I've just said, right? Even within the whole giving him a chance to see how Arne Slot works, I think he needs to be treated as a separate case to the other two. And the fact that he isn't is slightly concerning, to say the least.
Let's talk a little bit about the rivals then, because as ever, assessment of windows and squads and all that needs to be in context with what everyone else is doing and the teams you're coming up against. So we'll start with Man City. They are the champions, Neil. They have the lowest net spend in the entire Premier League, which is really interesting. Liverpool are second, which is an interesting thing as well. I think minus 107 million. I think it's generally being worked out as. Obviously, that'll be a give and take a little bit. It does include the money they got for Cancelo, who wasn't really a Man City player in particular. But it's still a big chunk of money for free spending Manchester City to be sort of bringing in. So what do you think's going on?
Well, I mean, that's a remarkably complicated question. I think the first thing is that, I think they saw an opportunity with Alvarez, and I think they'll also feel as though Alvarez's race at City was run, and I think they've also run him into the ground, and he's been run into the ground across his seasons and his time there. And they saw the opportunity. I think it actually becomes the most valuable move of the window is Alvarez, I think, by the end of it. And I think the player's worthy of enormous respect. I think he's better than his press in this country as well. So I think that all round, that was one of those deals that I just think sort of will have suited everyone. Gundogan, they get an opportunity to do it, and it just makes so much sense given everything else that's gone on, and the fact that, and I think it is interesting, Kovacic has started the season quite importantly for City, but I think in general, and Kovacic is also 30, I think in general City have actually struggled a little bit to purchase in the middle of the park to the level that they want in the context of the conversations that we're having around our situation. City have struggled to do that, I think, effectively. Across the last couple of seasons. I think they also felt as though a couple of last season signings were just beginning to come to the boil at the end, if you want to just do this in a sporting way to start with. So I think that Doku and especially Gvardiol were just really becoming part of what City are about. I think they felt as though they can run another year out of Walker. They've got De Bruyne. Now De Bruyne and Gundogan are both.
They've kept everyone as well. No one's talking about
expiring at the end of the season as well, and so everyone else, Howard Bellis, etc., just doesn't really touch the sides. They've done Savinho from inside the City group, and he looks to be like a really promising sign and a good player, and he looks like their player. He's one of those. Sometimes I see a lad. The first time I see him play for a team, he looks like he's on 50 games in every single sense. Like his face just fits, and that's sort of where I am with Savinho in there as well. They've got a couple of young players around that squad. They wanted to use Bob, but he's fractured his leg. I think they had to do something with McAtee one way or the other, either sell him or use him. It looks as though they're going to use him at least in the first half of the season, and I think that they really like Rico Lewis. And whether or not they're right or wrong in that is a separate matter. But I'll trust Pep Guardiola.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing.
I think that there's a real thing there, Neil. And what Neil said, I'll go to Mo. But on Neil's points on these younger players, and that they've had this incredible academy for a while. They spent a huge amount of money on it, in terms of every aspect of it. The private education that all these kids are sort of getting, the players that they're recruiting, But it comes to a point where, the fact that winning all, the under-21 league and the under-18 leagues every year like they do. I think they want a treble or something in terms of the, the leagues that they're sort of winning. But it's a bit on what if they're just all end up at Southampton. Yeah. And so I think they probably have got to the point where we're like, well, in terms of, how it looks in terms of for the recruitment, we need to start using these players, but also, we're going through this whole sort of thing and we're producing these. I think there is seemingly a little bit of a desire to start using them a bit more.
I should hope so. I mean, I wonder whether or not, even though I think most people would agree that the move from Cole Palmer to Chelsea suited him and suited City in a way that he probably wasn't going to be able to play as much as he wanted for City. I think it's probably the first time when they've let go someone who everyone agrees, well, this kid's actually going to be a star. Like,
it feels like the one that would have stung.
Yeah, definitely. And so there's probably a feeling, well, we're going to need to at least try some of these more. But the other side of it is, you're right. I mean, they have struggled to buy central midfielders. Mateus Nunes paid 50 million for him, and he's not really done much at all. Calvin Phillips, the same situation. He's not really played. Yeah. I mean, they've got him out there. And you look at the midfield stocks of the guys who they regularly use. You've got Phil Foden at 24, and everyone else is 28 over. So they kind of need McAtee to be able to step up. And yes, the argument to say that obviously the way that they play, Rico Lewis is in a lot of midfield positions. So you can say that he maybe adds into those stocks as well. But you've got a lot of guys who are 28 and over who are still playing a lot of their time, and they have to try and find a way to replenish that. So whether that's using players from the youth, whether that's adding up a lot of money from sales like Alvarez, sales like Harwood Bellis, bringing in guys like Gundogan on a free, means that they can go and attack the market in a big way, maybe next summer or something like that. But it goes to show that even the team who is seemingly walking the league year in, year out, is not actually got it perfect when it comes to team building. And even though we say, oh, well, yeah, every summer they look like they're going to leave and then they don't leave, there's a reason why they look like they're going to leave every summer. Like, it's not perfect. It's not like everyone's saying, well, there's nowhere I'd rather be than Man City, because they are tempted at some point, even if they do end up staying. So I think there's going to come a point in the next 18 months to 2 seasons where City are going to have to go out and buy a lot of players in one summer and hope that it works.
There's two things that are in the non-sporting sense, if you want to discuss City's business, and I'm almost loath to do this with Rob present, because it becomes conspiratorial. But the first thing I point out is I think Guardiola's going to go at some point, and I think when he goes, I think a few of the players who've been on the verge of going in different ways will just go at the same time.
Yeah.
And then therefore, if everything's gone pretty swimmingly up until that point, they will want an enormous amount of financial headroom, both actual cash in the bank, because I'm not sure how City run at the minute. We know they can always access funds, but you want cash in the bank, but also they want PSR headroom to be able to really back a new manager and say this is now a new team and it's a new project and it's a new beginning, because all of this has happened at once. Those players have gone, Guardiola's gone, and all this has come together. There's a further conspiratorial point, which is what they're doing at the minute, is they're raising an unbelievable amount of PSR headroom that could happen if a side got relegated, to be able to hold on to players and pay wages and not therefore further break other PSR rules in the realm of something like the EFL, or even if you had a transfer ban for 2 or 3 years or something else went on, be able to give yourself wiggle room to manoeuvre, to overpay existing players to get them to stay, or accept that some are going to go, some are going to stay, but we want to be able to bounce back pretty quickly and then rebuild. And there could be both of those situations.
And good young players will help with that.
And good young players help with that. And both of those situations I've just described could actually combine, in that you could have a situation where Pep Guardiola, where the worst happens from City's point of view, however we define that, with the way in which the charges go. Then from there, Guardiola decides, well, I'm going to go. I was probably thinking of going anyway, but I will just go now. Then from there, 2 or 3 of your Gundogan, De Bruyne, a few others, they also go. So you need to do a bit of a rebuilding job, get a new manager, and this is now going to be rather than the idea of we have to rebuild with a new manager from a position of strength, relatively speaking, Champions League football, etc., etc. We're doing it all the way from back down in. But we will be the biggest scalp in the Championship, say, and we expect to come straight back up. But then from there, we then need to rebuild again to get back into European football and all of those hits. And I think that if you view City's decision-making in that context, I think they're doing loads of really rational things. Really rational things.
I'll first ask, well, why not while Rob's here? Because I default to the conspiracy theory.
Because you love a conspiracy. You're
especially when they go straight to the top.
I joke about that, but I don't actually believe it. But I do think with City, look, the City project has borne the fruit it has, borne the titles and the cups it has, because they were able to front load to a large extent in investment in the transfer market. A front-loaded investment,
and in everything, the academy as well.
And in everything, an investment which might come home, they may be reaping what they sow if these 115 charges end up being proven. But the one thing is what life. I'm sort of going to repeat your point in a way, Neil. But what thing life looks like the other side of those 115 charges is, in a way, it's a bit like a bankruptcy. It's a clean slate in a certain sense. Now, if they have a PSR headroom because they've offloaded all the lads they have and they're complying with UEFA's fair play things, and they've built the theoretical opportunity to spend £500 million, let's just pick a number in the transfer market, to start City 2.0 post-Guardiola, then that's what I would want to do if I was them. And they also know, look, at the end of the day, we love to say it's their bags of money on the pitch winning all the trophies. Fuck knows it's also Guardiola in a big way. Mm-hmm. And I think they know that post-Guardiola, whoever they get, there's not an obvious candidate, as we know in looking for Klopp's replacement. The next guy who comes in is going to look a lot better if he's got another £500 million worth of footballers to launch his project. And I think I don't think it takes conspiratorial thinking to see that's the way it's going, because either two tsunamis, if you want to call them that, are about to hit Manchester City Football Club. One is the possibility of the charges being largely proven and relegation, but the other one, quite frankly, is one of the best managers in the history of the game leaving. That's as big a blow to Manchester City as whatever they can do to them on these charges.
And also the man they built everything for. It's worth saying. It's worth it. And also, cheeky Bergerstein could go at the same time as Guardiola, who built all of that to put it in place for Guardiola, and he could choose the same time to say, but what else am I doing here? Yeah. Because, by the way, someone in any of these positions, separate to the charges and the charges question, anyone deciding, but what else am I doing here? Is a perfectly valid conclusion to draw, and especially if there is a lightning moment, which is Guardiola decides that. I think anyone at any other level, every member of the backroom team, every member of however they've structured their sort of sport director idea, any of them, we know that a couple of them have actually gone to United over the course of this summer.
Well, one of them's left already, apparently. Well, leaving already.
But you can understand how, for instance, they might even at City be going a bit like, but I guess it's weirder there. Say what you want, and you can. I think at the minute City are able, not least because they've got Guardiola and what Guardiola's probably saying to them, which may well be, actually, I just want to run a few of these lads another year. Actually, I'm happy with just Gundogan back. I've sorted. He knows what we're doing. I don't have to spend 6 months getting to like him because I despise them all. I know him already. Everyone loves him, and he'll just click straight back in. It's just easier for everyone if we just do it this way.
But also, if we think that it's tough to replace lads in our squad because they're all so good, what the fuck does City think? There are, as you said, there just aren't that many players who can come into that squad. Who are they going to? Who's better than Bernardo? Who's better than Rodri? Etc. Etc.
And they've tried and failed. And that's the thing.
As you said at the beginning.
Yeah, and it makes it harder every single time. In terms of the Guardiola point, I do think that we will see them make a concerted effort to try and get Arteta. And whether it's successful or not, because whether he's fully entrenched in Arsenal, we'll have to wait and see. However, I think if Arsenal do really, really well and still don't win the league again, then I think, and because don't forget, Arteta's in the last year of his contract right now as well, by the way. So it's very feasible that there are people within City who remember Arteta when he was in the building and like him and say, this is clearly our continuity candidate. We need to do everything we can to try and get this guy. And let's try and destable one of our biggest rivals at the same time.
Just to bring it back to the window, I messaged a couple of City fans this morning. Neil, I said, well, what do you think of your window? And they were interested. And they both come back straight away, which is really nice of them, and talked about, what you'd sort of expect. They were like, well, fans get nervous about the smaller the squad that the Guardiola likes, but they've sort of come to accept that he knows what he's doing. But the Haaland one was quite interesting because they were like, it's very strange to talk about Haaland. There's a problem when he keeps scoring hat tricks every week, but they're like, well, what does it look like now when he doesn't play? And it is an interesting one, really. And it reminded me of what you said last year about our forward line, in that variety looks great, but actually when you've got one fella doing one thing, one week and then another fella do something completely different the next, it's sort of quite hard to play with. And one guy who was in particular who I was speaking to said he actually likes City when they play with the false nine, but he doesn't think it's something you can just, we'll do that every now and again. He thinks you've sort of got to commit to it for the season, and the season he committed to false nine. Again, this lad was saying he really enjoyed watching them play, but he doesn't think, he basically thinks you need someone to come in and be a bit Haaland. But he's like, A, we haven't got him, and B, it's just a dead hard thing to get someone good to sign up for. So that's his concern. He's like Haaland's fucking brilliant and he's great, but he's a bit worried about City this year in ways he hasn't been in the past about when he doesn't play, which was quite interesting, I thought.
I think it is interesting. It's a little bit of the problem Tottenham had with Kane, and if you want to go back even further, it's a little bit of the problem we had with Fernando Torres. And I think it is something which takes a bit of looking after. It would not surprise me if at some point in the season, it wouldn't surprise me if he actually stopped banging hat-tricks or being on two, if Guardiola would start taking him off on the hour mark to do something else for half an hour, and then we have a look at it. And that's the way he gets it into them, if you see what I mean, for when he's not going to be there. I think Haaland, at some point in the season, will get an injury, and that injury will look like a 2-weeker, and he'll end up being out for 6. And the reason why will be that Guardiola will see it actually as an opportunity to make sure that the Haaland that comes back is in absolute peak physical condition on the one hand, but to your City friend's point, we've had 6 weeks playing the other way. And firstly, he'll back himself to make it work, but also, so if it's not working, Haaland will be rushed back. But if it's working, it'll be you just get yourself wrapped up in cotton wool. There'll be a genuine conditioning program for him, and I just have my eye out for that, because that's what I think they'll do. And then he comes back, but then Guardiola will feel like, and I think he'll feel like it to an extent anyway. Bernardo Silva, Kev De Bruyne, Phil Foden, they all know what it's like to line up an attack for City without Haaland, when you've got to do it a little bit differently without the shape. I think what your friend there is referring to, arguably, is this is the risk of the Alvarez sale.
Yeah.
More than anything.
It was on the knock on for the Alvarez. Yeah, but then it goes back to what one of the guys was saying before, is that there's only so long you can keep these people happy in these situations.
This is why Alvarez isn't there, quite frankly. At the end of the day, he's an elite player who is not going to be second fiddle. We can talk about squads all we like. You could talk about Liverpool in the Mo Salah era, really. I mean, Mo Salah has been all but ever present, has almost never had an injury. The periods we've been without him have been usually AFCON months, and we play a different way. It's not the same Liverpool. We've never been able to solve that problem, what life looks like without Mo Salah, quite frankly.
It looked like Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Genuinely looked like Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain all the time.
The only time I thought we did look like we'd worked it actually was last January, which was we played the best football, January, Feb, we played the best football we had of the season, largely without Mo. And I think that spoke to the fact that we just had a huge array of options in attack, and that helped. And I thought that since minute one this season, what the fuck are they doing without Haaland? But that's the key thing, is just have Haaland play 90% of the time. And as you just said, get him off after 60, keep him fresh. And the other thing at the end of the day, I was watching City, that move where Haaland scores that incredible second goal against West Ham the other day. The one in the build-up who's fantastic is Jack Grealish. And I thought, I forgot about him.
Yeah.
You say they've got a small squad, but bloody hell,
12 to 15, they're incredible.
They are just all good.
That's where the sort of arguably at their strongest in terms of who the 4 lads who don't play. They're the best ones in the league.
They also blur midfield and attack, don't they? Brilliantly, I think. So that you can go, how many forwards have they got? I'm always confused how many forwards they've got. They've got Grealish on the website. Well, I don't know. No,
it's worth the Manchester City website's dead funny.
Yeah,
because basically Manchester City have decided, because they categorise the players as they go. Yeah. I think they've decided they've got the goalkeepers, then they've got 6 defenders. It might be 7, but I think it's just 6. Then they've got 13 midfielders, and then there's just Haaland on his own row. Oh, fucking hell, trainer must be interesting for you, Haaland.
They split them into groups.
There you go. That exactly proves they blurred those lines. So, I mean, in a way, I kind of wish we were a bit more like that, because we got 6 forwards, and we've got 5 plus our second tier midfielders. Like we've got, I'm counting Endo and Tyler Morton in the second tier. Could do that being a little bit more homogenous in a sense. I mean, you could bring Gakpo into play, but The way, but it's not just in attacking midfield they do that. They do it from defence to midfield as well. You know what I mean? It's just the whole fucking thing's homogenous. That's why it works. So, and they're all really good. You know, if they can all play every position and they're all £90 million players, of course they're going to win a football match.
Let's do a little bit on Arsenal then before we finish up, Mo. In terms of ins, they got Calafiori, who was obviously linked with Liverpool, Marino, who was from Real Sociedad, who we found it tricky to buy from, so fair play. They got Veron, he was obviously a player, but they paid the money for him. And then later on in the window, Neto joins him as another goalkeeper, I think on loan actually, and then the Raheem Sterling one, which is really interesting. Outs, there's a fair few, some decent players. Emil Smith-Rowe, who's gone to Fulham and scored already, and Nketiah, who's gone to Forest, Ramsdale, Southampton, and then there's actually a few decent players who've gone out on loan who won't sort of list, but you know, there's
Rhys Nelson.
And so again, when I've spoken to Arsenal fans, I didn't this morning because I'd sort of done it already. They felt they were really short in attack, and then the Sterling one was a bit of a okay, well at least sort of that's one, but they don't feel like he can play 9. And again, there's these worries that, you know, who is sort of playing up top, and do they have enough there? What have you made of the business that they've done?
Interesting, because I think that they had 2 moves that they could do. They could either try and bet the farm and go big on a striker and say that we are going to have to change some of how we want to play, or they can just try to kind of tweak around the edges, just try to add a bit of depth. So the Calafiori, I think, is going to be ultimately turn out to be a very good signing. I think Marino is interesting because you can look at it and say he's depth, but you can also look at it and say, well, he's probably, when he's fit, going to be playing most games because they need to...
Who does he push out?
Partey. Absolutely, okay. Partey.
Is he that position?
Well, this is the thing, because it does mean slightly different roles for Declan Rice and potentially for Odegaard, because Marino can play as a deepest line midfielder, but he's not necessarily the same profile as Partey. He's not a bite your legs man. So that means that Declan Rice will have to do some leg biting. But then the argument is that, well, we've seen what he's like when he's got one of those behind him. We're going to have to compromise. And that kind of goes back to what I was at the beginning and the betting the farm on the striker. Like, the rumours are that earlier on in the window, they were inquiring about Victor Osimhen and they were told 120 million euros, and they were like, thanks, but no thanks. But then when we got to the last week and suddenly the Osimhen was worth 60-odd million pounds, I'm surprised that they didn't come back to the table. Because you can look at it and say, well, it would fundamentally change how we're playing. But you can also look at it and say, well, you guys need depth in your attacking areas. That is the number one priority.
Was it the wage that maybe stopped them short?
Perhaps. But again, I think that the way that they are currently structured, I think most of their best players are on long-ish deals. So there might be a big wage for an Osimhen might bring 1 or 2 of them in saying, well, maybe we need parity with this guy. But I don't think it would be as many. I think it would be a manageable number from Arsenal, personally. I think it would have been worth it.
Do you, though? If you think, I mean, you could go, the centre of defenders could come into play, Odegaard and Rice could come into play, the 2 of the wingers could come into play. It's quite a few.
Yeah, but a lot of them only did deals last year. A lot of them have only just done deals. So I think that for them to come in again, you could say, if you're Arsenal, you could say, well, okay, well, the next cycle. So we'll see how we do with this first. But I just think that already they've got themselves in a situation where they're relying on Havertz being fit for the whole season, because the backup, Gabriel Jesus, literally can't stay fit. And then with Sterling, you really don't know how much you can use him. I think he's a good man to have around the squad. I think he will help them in a lot of intangible ways, but whether or not he can come on. So, for example, Leandro Trossard, he comes in and he starts off as a backup, and he's now forcing his way into the starting lineup through his industry and his production. Do we think Sterling is going to be able to do the same thing in this Arsenal team? I'm not sure.
The minute when Sterling was on the market, he was linked to Man U, I think before Arsenal. I piped up on Twitter and said, I think he'd be a good, before we had Chiesa as well, I think he'd be a good buy. I wouldn't say everybody disagreed with me, but a fucking fair chunk gave me very clear what their opinions were. I think it's nuts. I think if Trossard on paper is a good buy, Raheem Sterling is on paper a better buy.
I don't think people were expecting people to get the deal that Arsenal got. Arsenal got a great deal.
Yeah.
On Sterling.
Yeah. Like they're paying a third of his wages.
I think it was clear Chelsea had really burnt all their bridges with him. And I let's put it this way. I think if we'd wanted Sterling, we could have got Sterling. And I'm not saying we should have done. On paper, you give me the chance to wind the clock back. Do you want Chiesa or Sterling? I'm going to bet on Chiesa. He's younger. I think the ceiling at this stage of his career is potentially higher. But
you
only
can buy him.
Sorry?
You can buy him and put him on a wage full time, if you see what I mean. You've got the asset. It's not just a loan.
Yeah. But having said that, I think it's marginal. If somebody tells me that Sterling's forced his way into Arsenal's front, to be picked more often than not by the end of the season, colour me not surprised. Every time I watched Chelsea and Sterling was in the team, I thought he was really, really dangerous. I don't think he's finished by any stretch of the imagination.
The biggest problem to the idea of Sterling forcing his way into the team is Bukayo Saka.
Sure, because he'd rather be on the right, yeah.
Yeah, not only because he'd rather be on the right, but because he very rarely misses games. He's Salah-esque in that respect, which is another reason why he was always on top of my list to replace him ultimately.
Raheem can play false nine.
Can he, though?
I think that if you're smart, I think with Sterling, why I think Sterling is a really good buy is that, first and foremost, he'll allow you to take off Havertz and Saka and not have for 20 minutes, 30 minutes here and there, and at least not have the opponents go, oh, well, it's only X. They'll have to still cater for them. You've still got to defend them, if you see what I mean. And, I think that helps. I think he can play false nine. I think he can play where Odegaard can play. And I think one of my big things for Arsenal is everyone keeps saying what you do if Havertz doesn't play, what you do if Saka doesn't play, what you do if Odegaard doesn't play. So I think the idea that he could play where Odegaard is, or you could move Havertz there, or you could do a little bit of jiggery pokery across the board with what you can do with Sterling. For me, I think the most concerning things for Arsenal, Mo's already mentioned Jesus. I think there's another one, and I don't know what the answer to it is, and I'm genuinely surprised that it's ongoing, is I think you're on the verge of being able to describe where Martinelli is as a genuine decline. Now I think he's in a genuine trough, and it may well be that he's a sort of footballer who could just do with a change of scene. I think he just looks, at the moment where I think we all expected him to kick on, is the moment where I think he looks to me like his levels really dipped. So
has he had injuries? He's had
a couple, but I think that it is that, and that'd be my concern for Arsenal still. Does Sterling help with that a teeny bit? Does he solve that? There'd need to be a serious resurgence.
Okay, I'm going to go along with the view of Neil Atkinson on Twitter that no one else is any of our business. So fair play. So fair play to Man United and Spurs have spent a bit of money. Good luck to them. Who the fuck knows what's going on at Chelsea? And Villa have done loads both ways, and I can't figure out if they're any good
Listen
either.
to the Top 6 show if you want to hear about all of that, by the way.
No, that's available for TAW subscribers. So there we are. You will get all of that. Listen, huge thanks to Bob, to Neil, to Mo for joining us, for Green King Sports for sponsoring these midweek extras for the rest of the season, to Andy as well, a producer, and for Joe for doing the video. That has been Midweek Extra. Hope you've enjoyed. We're back, baby.